This morning at the General Government Subcommittee's first meeting of the 22 session. A number of important policy issues and spending items for the subcommittee to consider this year, spanning all branches of state government, as well as multiple political subdivisions, including the courts. A lot of things to talk about, including significant investments in employee compensation, benefits and staffing, information technology infrastructure, cybersecurity enhancements, constitutional rainy day fund, and discretionary revenue reserve fund deposits, as well as, of course, remote work and reopening certain governmental functions, including the Virginia Supreme Court. This morning, we'll have the opportunity to speak with the Commonwealth's new Secretary of Administration, the Honorable Margaret Lynn McDermott. Secretary McDermott has extensive public and private sector experience, executive level experience, most recently having served as CIO of the Federal Reserve System and the Director of the Federal Reserve Information Technology. So, Madam Secretary, we welcome you and look forward to the introduction and conversation. Following that, staff will provide a brief overview of the Governor's proposed amendments to the current fiscal year Senate Bill 29 and the introduced budget for the upcoming biennium Senate Bill 30 as they relate to general government with a focus on across-the-board and targeted employee compensation proposals. As a couple of housekeeping items, I'd like to remember the members at the meeting is being live streamed. So when speaking, please use your microphone. Also, presentations will not be shown on the live screen, but any presentation and other meeting materials are available on the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee website at safc.virginia.gov. So members of the public can reviewing remotely can follow that. And with that, I'd now like to invite the new first guest, Secretary McDermott, to introduce herself. Please come forward. Yes, ma'am.
Would you like me to leave my mask on? Or?
Take it on or off. Fine with me.
Okay.
Whatever you're comfortable.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Senator Peterson and the subcommittee for inviting me to speak with you this morning. I thought I'd start out with just a little introduction about myself, other than what's in my bio. I have been a resident of the state of Virginia for 50 years. We raised our family here, and I'm very lucky to have grandchildren in the state, too, so all my children stayed in Virginia. So I accepted this position because of my love for the state, and I'm really looking forward to working with you and others as we look at the administration function within the committee. I, as you mentioned, have been a CIO for almost 30 years now, both in the private sector and in the, I guess you call it quasi-government Federal Reserve. Have dealt with many issues around cybersecurity, large program portfolios, and significant work done in the area of infrastructure. So I feel like I have the opportunity to come here, work for the governor, and make things better, and that's why I'm here.
Great. First of all, thank you so much, and are there any questions from the panel? Let's start with Adam, and then work our way down. Adam.
Yeah, just welcome and thank you for your work or for your anticipated work. But it's not so much. I don't want to quiz you on your first day, but we're engaged in I know major expenditures to overhaul our election computer system, and I just hope that you'll keep a cautious eye on that, because as we change to same-day voter registration in this coming November, that system's going to be really important that we don't have any failures.
Yeah, I have looked into it a little bit. I know that it's late in coming, and is one of probably the top 3 systems that I think that we need to pay attention to. Veris is a system, so I will certainly pay attention to it and make sure it gets done and done right.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Senator Newman.
Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
A couple of things. One, I know that your resume is even much deeper than what you stated. You're being a bit modest, and you've done the work at Dominion Power and others. You've been a leader in those organizations. I guess thinking a little bit about cybersecurity and, as it falls under VITA and otherwise, would be a critical issue, I think, for all of us. Your experience is vast in that area. It's kind of a unique pick because of that. Can you talk to us just a little bit about your thoughts about going in and doing some review of cyber and where we're headed?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. I think the first thing we're going to have to do is really assess where we are. What is the current state? I know that the recent breach has been the result of just poor hygiene, not updating, not upgrading equipment, lack of our websites being properly protected. So the first thing we're going to do is what we call a red team sprint, where you bring in a team of professionals to really look at the current state. It should take about 30 days. We're hoping 30 days, so that then we can start setting our priorities of where to close things down, what protections to put around those external facing, particularly entities in all of the agencies. And I know the governor is very concerned. I have talked to many of the agency heads already and the cabinet members about that needs to be a top priority. Then we really need to look at training. You know, have we adequately, and I don't know the answer to this, but have we adequately trained all of our state employees on how to react? Not to click on phishing. It's kind of amazing that we still get those kinds of behaviors among employees. So we really need to look at, are we training sufficiently? Are we certifying sufficiently? And then start just making the repairs. The bad guys are getting faster, more sophisticated. So keeping up with, working with other agencies to keep up with what are the threats, what's coming our way, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So, thank you for that. The other one really, and it's going to probably fall within your bailiwick and also within Secretary Cummings, Steve Cummings.
Yeah.
But the IT and the ERP system attacks clearly is barely lunking along. We've all ignored it for a long, long
Right.
time, but that is a major ERP system, having everyone in this room's state and federal taxes for decades on it. Are you talking about something that would hit ransomware in a big way?
Absolutely.
I know that that's going to have to be a big
Okay.
item for you guys kind of as we go forward. It's a big one. Every state agency is big, but that one's just holding so much
Oh, thank you.
great information.
The amount of personal information in that system has to be tremendous. So I think, thank you.
Senator Locke.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Senator.
A lot of work has been done to address data sharing among our state agencies and local partners. And I know it's early in the game, but what do you plan to do to continue this effort?
As I understand it, there are many, but not all trust agreements, which are those agreements that really do kind of incent people to share information. So once you've signed a trust agreement, then it's appropriate to start sharing certain information. I think the first thing that I'm going to have to do, as well as our Chief Data Officer, is really understand where we are with that. What are the agreements? How much information is shared? And at that point, you get into the technology. What are the tools we're using? How are we protecting that information? Are we encrypting it appropriately? Where does it get stored? Do we have off-site storage for data that's critical? So all of those things are things that we need to get in right away. Again, with cybersecurity, data is what they're after. And most ransomware attacks are to get the data. So I think that will be a top priority. Protecting our information, protecting our data, understanding where it is, how it's protected. And there are appropriate tools. The IT profession has come a long way. We also will need to probably hire some people who understand it. As I understand it, most of the people in that group are contractors right now. So I think data scientists is a profession, and we're going to have to look for some of those folks to come in and help us.
Okay. I have a question, and sort of a half comment or a question.
Okay.
And for the past year, one of the things I've struggled with as the chair of the subcommittee is just to get information on where our employees were, and that was a DHRM question. It's not really in your universe. But one of the reasons why was if we are renting office space and/or owning office space and there are no employees there and there won't be employees there ever again, what are we going to do with this space? And that's one of the things that I never got a clear answer after 12 months, and I'd ask you to take that up.
So one of the things that I've talked to the Chief of Staff about is just that, and DHRM is in my bailiwick, by the way.
Okay.
Is just a master plan. Do we have a master plan? Do we know where all the facilities are? How many employees are in those facilities? How many of them might be working remotely at this time? Will return to work when appropriate? And I think once you have that master plan, then you start looking at reducing the amount of space, hoteling facilities, and you really do look at what's the optimal layout for state government. I think I know that we're looking for efficiencies, we're looking for cost savings, and that's an easy one.
Right.
Is to really look at your buildings and facilities and optimizing those. I've done that for data centers, and it's not easy. People love their space, but it really is an easy way to save money.
Great. Okay, anything else? All right, well, listen, thank you again. Appreciate your coming in, and
Appreciate the
we look forward to
opportunity.
work with you for a little while.
I do too.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Adam,
Yes, sir. So
take it from here.
I will, with your
Okay.
permission. I appreciate it. So I was going to focus on employee compensation. So first of all, this is going to be gone over in the full committee meeting at 9, right? So
Okay.
in the interest of time, I was going to focus on the employee compensation proposals first and see if there were any questions related to that and kind of do a little bit.
These slides are in our binder here?
That's correct. Yes, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
great.
The slides are in your binder behind tab 2, I believe. And employee compensation proposals start on page 4.
Okay.
And I'll also say that Katie Robertson from our staff is here as well. She covers public safety, and there are multiple public safety-related compensation proposals that are contained in the budget, so she's here to answer specific
Okay.
questions related to troopers and correctional officers and that sort of thing, and then it's kind of spread all over the place. So anyway, beginning with that, so focusing on employee compensation, the reason for that is because there's about $1.9 billion in employee compensation in the budget over the biennium, so that's a pretty significant investment in employee compensation. And that's a combination of across-the-board and targeted proposals. So for state and state-supported employees, that would include adjunct faculty and graduate teaching assistants on the state side. There are 5% increases each year of the biennium. And total cost of that is about $807 million or so, and the compounded effect of that is about 10.25% over the 2 years if both were to go forward. So there's another 755.8, this is in the education area, but the 5 and 5 for the teachers as well as another 756 roughly $1 million for teachers and SOQ funded instructional positions. And then there's over $307 or so million in targeted compensation actions, again, for state police, deputy sheriffs, regional jail officers, direct care associates at DBHDS, magistrates, scientists at the Division of Consolidated Lab Services, state mail services, and others that are just spread out all over the place as well. This captures the majority of them. So there we go, catching up. So on the next page, on page 5, this table shows the kind of the breakout of the big targeted compensation proposals, beginning with state police. If you recall, too, there were work groups that were put together in the previous budget, bonuses that were provided to state police, other employee groups, as well as language that directed various agencies to convene these groups. So they came up with proposals, and some of the recommendations contained in those proposals are reflected in the governor's introduced budget. So with state police, the buy-on the cost is $48.4 million. So this would increase starting salaries to $51,500 statewide. That's about a 7.7% increase from where they currently are. I think it's $47,800. And then Northern Virginia is about a little over $64,000. For DOC correctional officers, it's $85.2 million. Their salaries would increase to $44,000, which represents about a 25% increase. And supervisory staff salaries would increase by about 20% across the board. For compression, it's based on rank and years of service. And so if there are any questions, I can go. For example, a CO with 3 to 5 years experience would receive $300 plus 50 years of service. If you're a sergeant, for example, you get $1,500 and then $100 per year of service up to 30 years. For deputy sheriffs and regional jail officers, their salaries would increase to $42,000, and that's up from $35,149, and that's about a 20% increase. And there's a compression component of $100 per year of service up to 30 years. Are there any questions on any of those right now?
Yeah, let me sort of throw out an obvious question. I mean, this is all impressive that we're adding these salaries, but how does this track vis-a-vis inflation? I mean, are we keeping up with inflation? Are we behind inflation? Because my concern is we're going to build these numbers into the budget, and if inflation's at 6 or 7%, it's not really an increase at all.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is a good point. I think inflation is in excess of 6% right now. Whether or not that continues year over year, if you see a little bit of a correction in that, it's kind of hard to tell. I do know that looking over, a 20-year period or so, based on the recent investments that have been made the past few years, we've kind of caught up in the aggregate. If you looked at inflation over a long period of time, obviously
right.
People in the past, if your salary didn't keep up with inflation in the past, it doesn't matter that over a 20-year period, those that are experiencing now have gotten salaries that reflect kind of those cost increases. But we didn't experience a lot of inflation for a long time post Great Recession, right? So it's just now ticking up. But having said that, the recent consecutive 5% increases would help, and then also this 5 and 5, depending on where inflation heads after this, that certainly would help. You don't want to move backwards. So if anything, you're just keeping up.
I guess my perspective is that I think 5% is a good number going into the first year of the biennium, but if the inflation continues, around 7%, we're going to have to move that higher next year.
Sure.
And we'll have the money to do it, quite frankly.
Yes, sir. That could be
All
the
right,
case.
that's not a question, I'm telling you. Okay.
Fair enough.
I'm sorry, keep going.
No. Okay. So, where are we? Okay. So page 6, this is some of the other targeted compensation proposals that are in the budget. So in DBHDS, Direct Care Associates, the first year would be covered with ARPA. Second year is about $72 million, and this would increase the salaries for those staff to 75% of the market median, and that's starting salaries as well as existing staff. So there's kind of addresses that compressive component of increasing the starting salary as well. For magistrates, there's a salary initiative that would increase their salaries to $54,000, and then also provide for adjustments based on years of service and performance for magistrates as well, given apparently the courts are experiencing pretty significant turnover in that position based on the salary and the demands of the job. In the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services, there's a proposal to increase scientist salaries. There was a study that was done showing that they were kind of out of whack relative to both public and private sector comparators, including DFS. And so there's a proposal to increase. That's about $10,000, I think, for the scientists going up through their seniority, their ranks. And then in state mail services, there's a proposal to increase salaries there. And this is kind of reflective of the increased responsibilities that they're taking on now, just given the nature of the job, security screening, looking for chemical contaminants and things like that just weren't really part of the role before, and just to make sure that they get competent, good people that can do that. And that is really it with the...
Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Eben.
Yeah, question for Adam. The state mail services, what is, we have a whole division of, what is that, people work in mailrooms in all state buildings, or?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Abbott, yeah, that's my understanding. They're under DGS,
Okay,
and I don't think it's not a lot of folks, but
Yeah.
they do a lot of mailing for elections. So elections kind of outsources all the mailing of all the absentee, a lot of all the paraphernalia, all that stuff that goes out to across the Commonwealth. They deal with that, and then also mail that comes in for the governor, lieutenant governor, et cetera, that could contain harmful chemicals. They have to test all that stuff as well, right? So they
Thank
have to have a somewhat training and background so they can accomplish that.
Okay.
So if there are no other questions, we kind of really just wanted to start there to make sure, given the size of the investment. So after that, I can just begin with SB 29, and we can just start moving forward and see as far as we get. And then we're going to start over again when we get to the full Senate Finance Committee. So, so given that, we're going to jump back to, if you don't mind, where are we? Page 2. Starting with the caboose bill. So that amends the current fiscal year, as you know, that's FY22. So overall, the proposed amendments to the current fiscal year total $554.1 million, general fund, and $1.4 million in non-general funds. And I'm not going to go through all these items, but just touching on a few of them. There's a voluntary supplemental deposit to the Revenue Reserve Fund of just under $564 million. You'll see also in SB 30, the Constitutional Rainy Day Fund deposit of $1.1 billion. So the revenue reserve deposit is essentially reflective of the amount that would have been required if a super deposit had been required, if you had met that threshold of general fund revenue growth of 5%. That trigger would have been. So that's kind of a placeholder for that and then making that investment. But again, that's more of the, and that provision related to the super deposit is also statutory. So that's a statutory deposit in the Revenue Reserve Fund. There's also a proposed reversion of $33 million in criminal fund balances in the courts due to lower than expected costs in the current year. And that's just based on case volume as of right now and accounting for an increase in backlogs that they'll accomplish. They were carrying a pretty heavy balance going in, and so this is actually a fairly conservative number with what they've got in the criminal fund that could be peeled back and then move forward. And then there's also language authorizing the 5% salary increase in the first year, given that it starts for state employees, it's effective June 10th, which is prior to July 1, the first day of FY23. So moving on, the next page really just kind of captures all of the items in general government, so you can tie back to the dollar amount. So we don't need to stay on that too long. We already covered employee comp. So moving on to
Senator Newman.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just slow down here, Adam. I think that something in kind of general government, we noticed that the last many administrations have been borrowing employees at a feverish rate, and especially moving to the executive because they just don't have nearly the number of slots as others. And I think it may help us at some point in this area just to look at that borrowing, because there's been a lot of borrowing from VITA, which right now needs employees back, right? And so we may want to look at that. I know that I've got a marker here on a budget amendment to kind of fix that, just to end the borrowing and bring the positions that have been there for years actually there legitimately instead of borrowing. So just something for us to kind of
I got you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Newman. So you're referring to not, I was thinking like working capital advances. You're talking about borrowing people.
Borrowing people.
On loan. Oh, yeah. That is also occurring.
been doing it for a decade.
Yeah. Understood.
I've got a follow-up question on that. If we find ourselves short-staffed in an agency, what do we do? I mean, let's say, for example, there's a COVID outbreak. I mean, do we call like a temp agency, or I mean, what do we put an ad in the RTD? What do we do?
That's a good, I know, you know, if you have Mel to accommodate it, then you can do that.
What?
If you have the maximum employment level, say you're carrying some vacancies, right? But if you're understaffed, I don't know. That's a good question for DHRM. I'm not sure the remedies they have to that. If you're up to your maximum employment level, how you deal with something like that.
Okay.
I know there are emergency provisions.
Senator Eben.
On another topic, I saw on the general fund actions on slide 3, it says elect staff new voter registration system greater than 0. Is that like a placeholder, or are we assuming that this new voter registration system and same-day registration will require employees?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Edmund, yes, I believe they had the reason that's greater than 0 is because the rounding thing, so I didn't take a separate, another decimal out. They have, yes, there's going to be a staff. They have a contract staff, so this, I think it's in the neighborhood of $25,000 would true that up to have a full-time FTE related to Veris. A
Okay.
new FTE. They obviously have IT folks that are dedicated
Yeah.
to the registration system.
Because I don't know with same-day registration if they'll have like a need for extra people on Election Day itself. I guess those will be the precinct workers, but
That's
there
correct,
might
yeah.
be some central.
And I believe there may be, at the chairman's discretion, perhaps, elect may come out and talk about, I know they've chosen a vendor for the new Vera system rebuild, so we may have an opportunity to speak with elect, and they can more fully explain everything that's going on with that.
Okay, keep plowing.
All right, where were we? So page 7, so starting with judicial, proposed amendments result in a general fund increase of about $58 million and a non-general fund increase of $1.2 million over the biennium. On the next page, looking at the proposed adjustments, and again, I won't go through all of these, but beginning with the general district court clerk positions, there's a proposal to provide $15.7 million and 120 district court clerk positions. If you recall, a couple years ago, positions were added, 120 positions. There was also language adjusted in Part 4 that increased civil filing fees to $36. It generated about $3.9 million, I think, to partially offset the cost.
Did we get that to the finish line? Because I thought maybe we rolled that back.
No,
That stayed in?
that wasn't unallotted.
Okay.
Originally, the positions were unallotted, but we didn't unallot the revenue associated with the civil filing fee increase.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
those were subsequently reallotted.
Okay.
So this would put them pretty close to where they should be with respect to staffing standards that they've got. I think they were down about 280 positions, so this would put them at 240.
Okay.
There's $4 million proposed to increase the grant amount for the state BARDA contracts for legal aid through the Legal Services Corporation of Virginia. So this is another compensation proposal that wasn't really captured under state employees or state-supported local employees, right? Given that we contract with the Legal Services Corporation for legal aid through the state bar. And then there are just a couple of small things, some adjustments. There is an additional judgeship for the 31st Circuit, and that is in Prince William, and that was a recommendation of the Judicial Council. So moving on to, if there are no questions, executive offices on page 9. The proposed amendments result in a general fund increase of $7.5 million and an NGF increase of $1.6 million over the biennium. And on the next page, looking at some of these proposals, there's $800,000 over the biennium and 2 positions to support the Cannabis Equity Investment Board. There is $1 million over the biennium and 4 positions to increase language access efforts promoted by the Governor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. You also see there's language access money that's actually in central appropriations too as a spread in addition to this. And I'll touch on that when we get to the central appropriations section. $400,000, 2 positions, Office of the Children's Ombudsman. $900,000, 4 positions related to consumer data protection, and this is related to the Consumer Data Protection Act that passed. That was 1392, effective January 1 of 2023. There's 1 animal law investigator position, and that's related to a bill that passed last year that prohibits the use of animal cosmetic testing. And then there's some dues. Virginia would like to join the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, and that reflects the dues to that organization.
What is that? Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Senator Ebbett.
Can I just ask Adam, do you know what that organization is?
I have a little bit of an idea what the organization.
What's it called again?
It is called the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission. So it includes portions of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, and Alabama. And I got this off the website before I came here. And it is
And
created to
what-
make federal investment in distressed counties of the southeastern U.S. That's as much as I know about it. I apologize.
That's great.
Okay, all right.
We don't know what our share would be.
I was gonna say, what do we get out of
Yeah, that
that?
was my question.
We get bowl game tickets or something?
I think, yeah, anything you can do collaboratively. I'm assuming. I'm not sure exactly. I would have to
Okay,
look
all right.
more into that.
See if you can arrange a junket. Okay, all right.
That's not ours.
All right,
All right.
keep going.
Page 11. So administration, the total proposed amendments result in a general fund increase of $199.6 million and non-general fund increase of $195.5 million over the biennium. Next page, looking at the proposed items, you can see the cost of the deputy sheriff and regional jail officer. Salary proposal I already spoke to. There is funding of $37.7 million to meet new minimum mental and behavioral health standards in jails. This is adopted by the Board of Local and Regional Jails. So this would fund 249 behavioral health case managers and 253 partially funded medical and treatment positions under the Compensation Board staffing standards. And I believe there was a DCGS report from last year that looked at that and made the recommendations with respect to the minimum standards.
How many regional jails are there?
22? I think it's about 20. I think it's 22.
Okay.
Maybe Dylan knows. Dylan, you don't have any?
I don't have the number off the top.
Okay, fair enough.
I guess I'm
I
concerned-
think that's right.
I guess I'm just concerned about how much the Hampton Roads Regional Jail would get, because they're in deep trouble.
Yes, ma'am. Right. This is it's a lot of positions. That is a lot. We're talking 500 positions, roughly. Yeah. There's $10.7 million to annualize previously approved constitutional officer staffing and compensation. So a lot of the adjustments you see in the comp board is just annualizing the first year cost of all the things that we did in Chapter 552 in 2021 Special Session 1, because you typically fund about 11 months of everything you do in the first year because all the localities are paid in arrears, so you're always 1 month behind. There's $1 million each year for the Circuit Courts Technology Trust Fund, and that would fully replenish the fund for the court's technology improvements, and that's been incrementally done for ever since I've been here, and I know it's probably preceded that for several years too. So that actually fully funds that, so they're not supplanting any of their operating dollars with their technology trust fund now. There's funding for Constitutional Officer Career Development Program funding for all currently eligible participants. I think Senator Lucas, this was a concern
Yes.
with treasurers, right?
Because a lot of because some of the treasurers have gotten their certifications,
Right.
but their salaries were not increased over the last biennium, as were those others who have been credentialed.
Correct. Right. That's right.
But
So.
there's only about 4 or 5 people.
Right, and that's, the treasurer, if you look, because that the cost here reflects all of the positions, all the constitutional officers that are eligible to participate in the program. So that should capture the treasurers. It was a small amount. I think it was like $80,000 each year or
Right.
something like that.
Thank you.
And then there's a reduction in jail per diems. You can see on the last line, $21.5 million. That's just based on the offender, the local and state responsible offender forecast that was done.
Yeah, Mr. Senator Newman.
Adam, I don't know what section it's in, but clearly we're doing the right thing now for our sheriffs and for our state police and others, but where's the police or the 599? For those of us that represent cities, it's just been a long time since we've had anything for the police to catch up, and where are we addressing that?
That is probably a Katie question. And 5 I will say that typically the state doesn't cover the salaries of local police. We do fund through 599. We typically don't, I believe, specify salaries, right? Because they're local employees. No, they're not like state supported local employees like sheriff's deputies are. But Katie could probably answer.
Yeah, Sarah Goodman, Mr. Chair. There is no, to your point, we had a small increase in the 599 program at FY20. But there is no proposal in the governor's introduced budget to keep up with the statutes. The statute says the increase for 599 will follow general fund revenue. There is not anything currently in the introduced budget for 599 above what we've provided in the past.
I hope there's budget amendments, Adam, because to me, it's just fundamentally unfair to address all of our other law enforcement and not do city police officers do. So it's just me.
Understood. Okay, moving on. time here. So administration proposals, moving on page 13. So in DCLS, there's a proposal, $4.7 million related to DCLS to increase their capacity to conduct bioinformatics and sequencing activities, and that would be 7 positions, and I think it's supplanting some federal funding that's expiring there. And I already spoke to the salary adjustments for DCLS and staff. There's just a minimum wage distribution for the May and January of the previous year increases to true that up. And then in elections, there's $2.5 million related to public education and outreach, and that would include informational campaigns on voting requirements. And then there's security software, so that's just a HAVA backfill. I think one of their applications was funded with HAVA funds, and those expired, so they're trying to backfill with some general fund revenue to continue that. And then they've got a request for 4 positions just for programmatic and administrative type activities within the office. And moving on, page 14, this is putting replacing the Personnel Management Information System, ISF, with the general fund appropriation. So when the Cardinal Human Capital Management System, as that's brought online, the old PMIS legacy system is essentially going to be held up in a parallel capacity to make sure that that data is preserved and can crosswalk into the new system. But it's not really the system of record anymore, so it's not really appropriate to have it as an internal service fund because agencies aren't really using it anymore. So what you do is in central appropriations, you see a cancellation of the internal service fund, and then they drop general fund appropriation now in the agency to continue to run the system. So it's not charged to agencies. So it's really just kind of moving from one place to the other, essentially. There's some positions for data and organizational analysis in DHRM, and this is really just to make up. I think they've had some turnover in that agency to do workforce analytics and look at stuff and use from a business intelligence standpoint, using Cardinal, looking at doing studies on employee compensation, for example, and this is really kind of to address meeting those needs. And then there's some systems costs in there. There is one thing. Let's see. So there's a review of executive job and pay structure. It's a one-time $75,000 that they're proposing to review executive pay to see if it aligns with the market and whether or not it's appropriate.
Adam, what executives are we talking about here?
I'm not sure how far down definitionally what an executive is, but I'm guessing that it's probably all of the positions that are listed in the back of the budget. So all the agency heads. So the salaries are specified for a lot of appointees, agency heads, cabinet members in the back of the budget. I think it's in part 4. And I'm guessing it's related to all of those positions. So the agency head type and up, I would assume. All right, so moving on to page 15. Finance. So the proposed amendments result in a general fund increase of $959.5 million and a non-general fund increase of $58.5 million over the biennium. Next page, looking at the proposed amendments. You can see there's the $1.1 billion on the top line to reflect the mandatory deposit to the rainy day fund in FY23. So that combined with the statutory or the supplemental deposit to the revenue reserve fund in the current fiscal year would result in a total combined fund balance of about $3.9 billion in FY23. And there's
where are you on that? I'm sorry.
Oh, are we on page 16? We should be on 16 now. I'm sorry.
Where does it say 3.9 billion?
That's just me talking.
Okay,
the first line is the 1.1. I was saying with the 1.1 billion.
Yeah, let's not talk too quickly.
Oh, okay.
Because you're talking about how much money we have on hand, right?
Sure.
That's a pretty important number.
Okay.
All right, let's slow down. How do you get to that 3.9 billion?
So with the $564 million that is proposed as a supplemental deposit of the Revenue Reserve Fund in
Right.
FY22 in the caboose.
Right.
In FY23, there's the $1.1 billion that's reflective of FY21 actual revenues that triggered the statutory or the constitutional deposit in FY23.
Okay.
Given where we are with the existing combined fund balances, those two things combined would make the new fund balance about $3.9 billion.
That's rainy day and the
Yeah,
reserve
exactly.
fund together.
That's correct, right.
Okay, and this is probably worth an entire session, but at what point do we hit the cap? The
Well,
cap
that's-
is 15%.
That's a good point, so I'll speak to that as well. So there is language, so there are two. There's a constitutional provision, and there's a statutory provision with respect to the balances. Constitutional says that the rainy day fund can't go over 15.
Right.
There's code language that says the combined balances can't go over 15.
Okay.
The budget also contains language overriding that statutory provision to allow for this to exceed the combined 15 because it does exceed the combined 15.
Already.
3.9 exceeds 15%.
I believe, yes, I
I think it
believe
does.
it's I think it's like 16%. I'm not the revenue person, but that's my
Right.
understanding. Yes, but that the language, even if we were to get close to it, just to provide for that flexibility, I think is what is what its intent is. But I do believe we exceeded the 15% with
Okay.
that. I think it's like 16%. But there's also a $924 million one-time additional deposit to the Virginia retirement system. So this would increase the funded status of all the retirement plans and other post-employment benefits. So that's like your health insurance credit for state employees and teachers, and group life insurance. I would increase all of those by 1 percentage point. So if it was 75% funded, for example, it'd be 76% funded. But it also reduces the cost. So there's cost savings of about $1.7 billion over 20 years, inclusive of all the plans in expected employer contribution rate savings as well from that deposit. So from a return on investment perspective, that's not too bad. So there's $191.3 million related to debt service, and that's VPBA and VCBA authorized debt issuances. There's $1 million for 7 worker misclassification auditors, and there's also about $700,000 in resources that's already programmed into the budget related to the expectation that you get more when you start auditing more people, sort of thing. A little bit of money, $900,000 to implement the tax policy proposals, and that's really, and then just a few really, really small items on that page between Treasury Board and Department of Taxation. Moving to page 17, Treasury, a few items. There's $6.5 million. That's related to 3 relief bills. And there's $2.5 million to cover the administrative costs of the taxpayer refund. So this is going to be banking services, postage, mailing, that sort of thing to accommodate that, similar to the last time a check went out to folks. There's $200,000 for a position in the cash management and investments division. And then just a couple of very minor adjustments there. There is more in non-general fund actions totaling $56.2 million. That's mostly related to adjusting the appropriation for the Cardinal financials and human capital management applications and property insurance too, some of which being cyber insurance. The cyber insurance component actually increased pretty dramatically and constitutes really the majority of the increase in property insurance for us. All right, now moving into central appropriations on page 18. Total general fund increase of $486.3 million and non-general fund increase of $877.1 million over the biennium. So looking at these items on the next page, you can see there's the 5 and 5% increase. Next, there's $100 million in the second year to implement funding recommendations from a study of the behavioral health system to be undertaken in FY23. And there's separate action under the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services funding the study in the first year. So it's presuming that you will adopt recommendations in a study that has yet to be done and then funding them in the second year. So novel concept. I'll just say that. So most of the remaining items really kind of reflect just the aggregate agency amounts for benefits adjustments for those internal service fund charges that I spoke to. Just touching on a couple of them. So $60.7 million is reflective of the general fund share of agency IT charges through VITA. And then there's a corresponding, within VITA is where you see really all the non-general fund spending side of this. This is just the general fund side for the increment for agencies to pay for VITA services. And then just a couple others I think are worth noting here. So for health plan premiums, there's $40.7 million, which reflects 2% and 2.5% increases in each year. The actuarial premium rate analysis suggested increases of 6% each year. But we've got a health insurance, we're a self-funded plan. So we have a health insurance fund that collects all the premiums and we pay for that. We've got a big balance in there of about $487 million the last time I got the number. So in the governor's budget, the 2 and 2.5 is subsidizing that actuarial rate of 6. So it's drawing down about $160 million, what would have been if you had adopted a 6% increase each year. And it's being paid for via the fund and kind of rebalancing that and getting the fund balance down to an appropriate level and then not fully subsidizing the increase. That may be more information you care to know, but that just keeping you aware of where there's $500 million just sitting there in excess of where we are from an insurance perspective. There's also $27 million for VRS employer contributions, so that reflects the full contribution rates adopted by the Board of Trustees. For the judicial retirement system, the state police officers retirement system, and Valor's, and it keeps the rates flat for teachers and state employees, given that actuarially those rates actually would have dropped, right? But it's for us, it's budgetarily neutral to keep them flat, right? But I will say that some localities may have programmed in a reduction based on the rate that the VRS Board of Trustees had adopted. So I'll just say that. That's all. But for us, it's budgetarily neutral.
Yeah, Senator Newman.
But doing that is critical if we're going to get the savings to VRS, right? I mean, we have to do both.
Yeah.
We have to put $1 billion in and keep the rates the same, and that's the only way you get the tremendous windfall coming into the system.
That's correct. Yeah, I just felt it appropriate to acknowledge that there could be some localities that had planned for a reduction and are not now. That's all. But yeah, to your point, absolutely. Okay, so there's the language access. So down you can see $10.8 million related to facilitating and improving language access, which is going to be throughout all the state agencies. That's why it's in central accounts. And there was the ODEI did a study last year, I believe, and I think this is just reflective of a lot of the recommendations that were contained in that report that came out. So it's going to be interpreters, changing websites to accommodate language access, and informational materials, changing those to be reflective of multiple languages and that sort of thing. And then there's $5.9 million to reimburse localities for the 2024 presidential primary expenses. Next page. Just a few more items. There's really not a lot there from a general fund perspective left. There's a little bit of money in the tobacco settlement fund, and that's going to go towards additional youth tobacco use and childhood obesity prevention and reduction activities through the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth, and that's NGF dollars. And then there is essentially allocating all of the remaining ARPA funds, inclusive of the $221 million in the capital fund. So it's the new continuing that was in Chapter 552, continuing stuff that are state and local fiscal relief fund, and then all the remaining grants.
Okay.
Other than the state and fiscal.
All right, Senator Eben, I have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the money for the tobacco settlement fund for youth tobacco use. Do they already have significant funding for cutting youth vaping, which is really an epidemic?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Eben, I have to admit that's probably a Mike Tweedy question.
Okay, I'll
I'm
check with
not-
Mike.
I'm not
Okay.
entirely, I would think.
Yeah, because I
but-
think that's really even more important, that's growing much faster than kids smoking tobacco cigarettes, so, thank you.
Yes, my question would be, we've got 873 million from ARPA, and it looks like the majority of that is set aside for 2023. I guess that's when we get the check from the feds.
I believe the funding is coming, is it 23?
It says FY 23, it says FY 23.
That, where it's programmed, that's a continuation of existing Chapter 552.
So we have the money in hand right now.
Yes, I'm sorry. So yes,
Okay.
there's, so FY '23 is going to be reflective of buckets of money allocated for continuation of things that were done in Special Session 2.
Right.
Carrying forward into the next biennium, those activities, new stuff, and state and fiscal relief in both years of the biennium, as well as just, there's all these grants related to ARPA that aren't state and local fiscal relief fund specific, $4.2 billion in total with capital.
Right, and a lot of that we allocated last summer.
That's correct.
Okay, now,
Yes.
so we've got this 873 million unallocated.
Proposed for allocation.
Well-
Yes, unallocated but proposed here, yes, that's correct, yes.
So we're proposing in this budget to use it?
Yes. The governor is proposing in the introduced budget to allocate the remaining amounts in the fashion that is, actually, you know what, there's in addition, in your books, I believe there's a table, because
Okay.
you also have the bullets for our pre-session summary document.
Because I would assume that this money is going to be spent outside of the ordinary general fund monies that we would spend for K-12.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's correct. And if you go to, so past page, that's last tab, towards the back, starting on page 25, it looks like this. You can see there's a table that shows the breakout of the ARPA allocations.
25.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not super specific in its title and its description, but you have a general census, so you can see that 253 million the first year and 85 million second year is the continuation, again, of those things that were adopted in Special Session 2. About 350 million the first year and 500,000 second year is new state and local fiscal relief fund proposals. And then there's 142 million roughly in the first year and 43.2 in those grants. And the table summarizes them in those buckets and describes them. So if you care to look at any of those, again, the descriptions aren't real descriptive.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Eppen.
Adam, did Governor Northam in his introduced budget leave any of the ARPA leftover funds programming open to the discretion of the General Assembly, or is he proposing using every dollar that was left over?
I believe it's all been allocated with the 221 in capital. I think it's all been proposed for allocation.
Thank you.
I'm going to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
And last question, I know we got to wrap up, but that's going to be in Senate Bill 29.
30.
Oh, it's in 30.
30, yeah, 29's the caboose.
So
we
30
put
is
it,
when
yeah,
we spend the balance of the ARPA
yeah, so
money.
and it would have been in FY '22 what we did in Special Session 2, and then 30 is going to carry the continuation, and the new stuff is in the big bill.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Newman.
I think this is an area we need to scrub it really well, because this money, I don't think has to be spent to 2024. And if we have something else and there's no other federal relief package coming, this is our money, right? So if we have a health problem or something like that, it's not just play money. It's something I think we need to probably be very careful and maybe even think about holding on to some of it for 2023 and beyond.
Well, I would say that that's true about when the money needs to be encumbered, and the period of performance actually extends a year beyond that, I think, just to your point. The longevity of the performance period, which is when you actually have to spend the money, goes out into like 25 or something like that.
Yeah, but it's also losing value if you don't use it.
Depending on the rate of inflation. You're correct.
That's
Yeah.
just reality.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anybody else got any questions? All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Okay, great. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, sir.